It's what seemed like a $20,000 mistake at the time, but it actually turned out to be $1 million loss, and we're going to talk about it.
This is one of those cautionary tales. Who is currently in control of the path that you're wanting to walk down today? Is there an opportunity for you to gain more control, have more say over what it is you're wanting to accomplish and by when? Somehow you've given them full autonomy to say yes or no to what your future is going to look like.
So if you're serious about becoming self-directed, this is a conversation you won't want to miss.
If you guys know anything about this channel, you know I talk a lot about a leveraged IUL. And we've walked through a lot of how a leveraged IUL is structured. Meaning, year one functions as normal. Year two functions as normal. But year three, something special happens. This is supposed to be an exciting moment in this gentleman's policy. And so I was just making my normal entrance into the third year call to a gentleman who had received a policy from me about 2.5 years ago. And when I get on the call, he goes, "Hey, I liquidated my policy." Wait a minute, you did what? Let's back up here. He had shared with me that, hey, based off what my financial advisor walked me through and showed me within the illustration that I had provided to him, based off what he reviewed, it was, you know what? The money that I'm putting in this policy is all going towards the life insurance company. I'm not getting anything out of this deal. As a matter of fact, there comes a point in time in this policy where by the time I hit around 70, what I'm putting in is all going towards the cost of insurance. And I was like, oh, okay. I started going down the path of like, what else? What are the other pieces here? And we'll dig into those details, but I just wanted to kind of highlight some things. One, his financial advisor said, hey, you know what you need to do? You need to liquidate this policy. Let's think about this. In most cases, are financial advisors able to sell life insurance-based products? It's possible, but in most cases, no. And in addition, what are they allowed to sell? They're only allowed to sell what it is they have to offer. What's his job? A financial advisor who works for Vanguard can offer you the mutual fund stocks and bonds that Vanguard is allowed to provide. But they also have, in most cases, a fiduciary responsibility, and we'll get into that as well. But here's what happened to him, just to kind of set the stage for this gentleman. 40 years of age, he started his policy when he was 40 years of age. He's contributing $1,500 a month, which is $18,000 a year. He is approaching year three. And as I mentioned, in this strategy, when you're approaching year three, something special happens. He had about $20,000 of cash value that was accumulated, actually more than that. He decided to liquidate his policy, which caused a $15,000 surrender charge. So out of that $20,000 that was accessible, $15,000 of it went back to the life insurance company, which means he received a check for $5,000. And ultimately, the impact of what he did, 18 and 18 is 36. He spent 36 grand over 2 years and then walked away with 5. In the short term, it looks like this is the impact. And that's what he was calling, well, when I called him, that's what he was sharing with me. He was like, hey, yeah, I know I took a hit, but it was better I get out now versus what could happen. And I said, well, let's have a discussion. Are you interested in better understanding how the decision that was made was the incorrect one and how we could have gone about addressing this differently? And he was open to it. What today is going to speak to as well is we give these people a lot of power. We give these institutions a lot of power, a lot of agency over us. And my question is, should we? The answer to the test is, this should not be a this or that conversation. The big miss here is not like, did the financial advisor do the right thing in questioning the performance of the policy? Yes. Did the financial advisor do the right thing in identifying some areas of opportunity? Yes. Now let's go get those answers, because it's not a this or it's not a don't do this, only do that, because that tells me you're trying to sell me something. Again, the gentleman is 40 years of age. I'll drill in. This is not a preferred plus non-tobacco client. He's standard tobacco. So he's a smoker, which means, what does that mean? Preferred plus non-tobacco compared to standard tobacco. All that means is his cost of insurance might look different. It may look different because he's rated different. That's all. And he's, again, as I mentioned, he's putting in $1,500 a month, which is $1,800 a year. And the reason I'm blowing this up is because there's 3 buckets in this document. There's a guaranteed bucket, alternate bucket, and a non-guaranteed bucket. We are going to focus our attention on the non-guaranteed bucket. So this advisor that was looking at his illustration also focused his attention on the non-guaranteed bucket. So it told me that the financial advisor does know how to read illustrations, because a lot of people don't. But let's just highlight why. This guaranteed section is saying, if I contribute $18,000 a year, this is what I can anticipate the growth on my dollar if there was no growth. And that's ultimately saying if the market crashed every year for the rest of my life, this would be the performance. Well, this isn't realistic. The alternate section is saying, hey, what if the market crashed every other year? Well, the likelihood of the market crashing every other year is not realistic. So getting rid of this, we focus on this section because it's as close to actual as possible. Now, it's illustrated at a rate of 6.25%. What's actual? Well, actual is actually somewhere around 6.87% on average. So it's about under-promising, but this section is as close to actual as we can get. What I usually ask, the question that I usually ask as it relates to whether or not a policy is structured properly or not, it always starts with, when do I break even? Because the break-even point inside of your policy usually tells me whether or not this policy is structured correctly. So let's start there. If I'm putting in $18,000, at what point do I have $18,000 working for me? So notice, in year one, I put in $18,000, I've got about 14.9, almost 15 grand, so there's about a $3,000 difference. That difference, those are the fees. So I do not break even in year one. Well, I've already done the math. If you multiply 18,000 by, I believe it's 8, you end up breaking even here, ultimately meaning he's put in less than what his policy is making at year 8. So the break even in this specific policy, the break even point is year 8. Is that good or bad? Well, if you've, again, spent any time on this channel, we talk about when you start hitting that year 7, 8, 9, 10, that policy is not very well designed. So if I'm his financial advisor and I'm following the same steps that I just mentioned, when does he break even? A flag for me is saying, hey, he doesn't break even in this policy until year 8. Why is that? And that's the right question. The question is why, not the question is something is wrong. Not, hey, the question is, it's not your policy has been designed incorrectly and so therefore you need to liquidate everything in this policy and get your money back. That's not the response. The question that should be asked is why? Why do I not break even before year 8? If this is supposed to be a great and wonderful process, why? And it's a really easy answer as to why. And it was at the request of the client. That's where you have to come here. Notice this section. This is a different page inside the illustration. When we talk about the structure of a properly designed IUL, we say it needs to be max funded. Max funded saying we need to be purchasing the least amount of life insurance for the amount that we're putting in. Notice, all I'm saying is the MEC limit needs to be right around the same amount that's being contributed. Well, if I'm contributing 18,000, notice the guideline max is 30,000, actually 30,800. So put in 18, the guideline max is 30,800. Something's wrong. Again, put in 18, the guideline max is 30,800. Why such a drastic difference? Well, that was intentional because the gentleman who wanted this policy said, hey, I'm anticipating getting a bonus this year, but I don't want to be obligated to have to put in a lump sum into this policy. So can we build room into this policy? If I'm putting in $18,000 a year and I know max funded would mean my MEC limit would be right around 18,000, can we create some room in this policy so that I can add additional dollars throughout the year? I don't want to be forced to do it. I want the room to be able to do it. Absolutely, I can do that. And here's the beauty of that action. Because we built in this room, what that ultimately means is we've built in the first jump. We've built in leverage in this policy. What do I mean by all of that? What's the strategy? The strategy is in year 1, I'm going to contribute to this policy. Year 2, I'm going to contribute to this policy. At the start of year 3, everything I've contributed in year 1 gets added to year 3. That means $18,000 of leverage gets added to year 3 on top of my 18, which means if this is a max funded policy, this dollar amount will have to move. But guess what? Because we built in the space early into this policy, it doesn't have to move. So he doesn't have to qualify for anything. He automatically has room for leverage. Now, it won't be the same amount, but he has room for the leverage if he does not max fund his policy. So I'm going to pause there for a moment. Moral of the story is this policy is designed with additional room. And as a result, his break-even point, make this bigger. Therefore, his break-even point, instead of it being somewhere in this space, his break-even point ends up being year 8. That's why. But just to compare apples to apples, what would this look like if he had a properly designed, meaning a cash value life insurance product, same dollar amount, but it was max funded, meaning the guideline max was equal to what he's contributing? How would that be different? If this built-in room wasn't there, how would his policy be different? Where would his break-even point be? Well, instead of it being year 8, it actually breaks even year 7. So, if you've been on this channel, when I talk about where policies should or should break even, usually I say somewhere between years 4 through 6, that's a really well-designed policy. Remember, this is not a prefer plus non-tobacco. This is standard tobacco policy, so there's already additional fees. And so for a max funded policy to break even in year 6, that's pretty powerful. But here's the piece about all of that. None of that matters. Because in this strategy, there are some special things that happen within this strategy that I'll call it negates all of those challenges. And it starts at year 3. He was at the beginning of where all of those actions were about to take place that, again, the pieces that his financial advisor pointed out as being a problem in this document, it all goes away at year 3 when that leverage kicks in, which means he was headed into the space where the challenges that his advisor brought up will no longer exist. So how could he have addressed this differently? He could have addressed this differently by just having a conversation with me. Bring your advisor to the call. Have him load up his questions. And let's spend 45 minutes breaking down why. I'm going to break down the why in this strategy, but I want to jump to something real quick. I want to jump to the fees. Here's why. One of the biggest issues that he brought up was this one. It costs more in insurance at around age 70. What I'm contributing to this policy, it costs more in the cost of insurance than what I'm contributing. What he's saying is, if I'm putting in 18 grand a year, that 18 grand a year is going towards all cost of life insurance, meaning it's a fee. My money's not working for me anymore, and that's a problem. So let's address that. Back here. So, you know I love to talk about the fees. This is the fee page inside the illustration. Here's my other challenge. His financial advisor was able to see the fee page in his illustration. Question for those of you with a cash value life insurance product of any kind. Go grab your illustration and turn to the fees page. In most cases, the fees page does not exist. So in this case, his financial advisor was able to go to it. Here's what he said. He said, hey, this $18,000 that you're putting in every year, well, this cost of insurance, which is located right here, this cost of insurance continues to increase, which it does. Cost of insurance increases as we get older. So again, he's putting in 18 grand. This is the cost of insurance. Notice how this number increases as we move down the line. And his challenge was somewhere around the age of 70. Let's look at 70. You've put in $540,000. You put in $70,000 at age 70. What is the cost of insurance? $13,000. So he wasn't talking about 70. But let's go to 73. 73, I'll make it a little bit bigger. At 73, you've put in $18,000. What is that cost of insurance? $18.22. Notice, every dollar you've put in premium at age 73 is all going towards the cost of insurance. Red flag. The next step should be why? Why is this and why should I be okay with it? Let's have a discussion about it. Because here's the piece that was missed. Did anyone care to look at, well, how much cash value do I have? How much cash value is available at that same time? I've put in $18,000. My cost of insurance is $18,000, but I've got $1.3 million available, leverageable, accessible to be able to use as income. Again, I've put in $18,000. My cost of insurance equals what I've put in. Fair argument. But I've got $1.3 million available to me. Why wasn't that a part of this discussion? Because who cares what I put in? Who cares that the cost of insurance is $18,000 if I've got $1.3 million in my pocket? Oh, and by the way, this is a life insurance policy. God forbid something happens to me. My beneficiaries, based off that $18,000 that I put in and that $18,000 in cost of insurance, my beneficiaries receive $1.8 million. And again, this is a bare bones policy. This is no leverage. So this is not indicative of what would be happening at that time. This is not indicative of what the true performance would be. I can't illustrate something that has not happened. So this illustration isn't actual. What is this illustration based off? It's based off a rate of 6.3%, which is about 0.5% less than actual performance. So as this year ends, this number will become whatever the actual amount is, which means this document updates. So I want to walk through how the dollars move inside this product. So in year one, again, inside of a policy where the room is $30,000, if you put in $18,000, there's a deficit of $12,000, meaning your policy is underfunded by $12,000. Okay? And again, that's intentional. This is what was asked to be done. Okay, you put in another $18,000 in year two. Now the $12,000 that was underfunded last year gets added to the $12,000 of this year, which means now you're underfunded $24,000. Okay, so now we hit year three. Year three is supposed to be this great and wonderful moment where we are now going to increase this MEC limit, jump the policy, in other words, so that we can add more leverage at this point. But guess what? We can't. Why can't we? Because there is a deficit of about $24,000 at the start of this year, which means the policy is underfunded by 24 grand. When he goes to put in this $18,000, there's room for an additional 12 grand because his MEC limit is 30. So what if we used 12,000 of the cash value that he's accumulated and put that in on top of the 18,000 that's already there? Meaning we're going to max fund his policy using leverage. And we do it again at year four. Well, when we do that, guess what happens? Because he's max funded his policy in year three and year four by using leverage that he already existed in his policy, he's now max funded for those 2 years. In order for the leverage to kick in order for you to jump your policy has to be max funded for 2 years consecutively. And in this case, that's what happens here, which means now we can jump his policy. Now we can create more room. And how much room can be created? Well, if the MEC limit was 30,000, and the way the strategy works is you take everything from the year prior and add that in as brand new principal. Well, if we add the premium from the previous year to that MEC dollar amount, to that max funded dollar amount, to that guideline max, 18,000 plus 30,000, that's 48 grand. So we're going to increase his guideline max to 48 grand, which means we're going to add an additional leverageable amount of 30,000 on top of the 18 that he's put in. Now his policy is back in position as it normally would be. Well, let's compare that to a properly designed, max funded IUL with leverage. It kind of started out that way, meaning instead of the MEC limit being 30,000, what if it was just 18,007 cents or whatever that dollar amount would be? Well, he puts in the 18,000, he's underfunded by zero. Put in 18,000 in year two, underfunded by zero. At year three, what happens? The room in his policy has to be an increase from 18,000 to 36. And then every 2 years, we're going to jump his policy again. So in total, what does this look like between both policies? In his policy, he would have about 312,000 at the 10-year mark of leverage being added in his policy, even though he's put in 180 grand. So these are the $2 amounts working for him in his policy. In a regular IUL with leverage that was max funded out the gate, it's the same 180,000, but it's 360 of leverage on top. So it's the difference between these two numbers. So because of how his policy was structured intentionally, there's a difference of, what is that, about $48,000 in leverage. What did he actually lose, though, in this process? Meaning, yes, he walked away with 5, and there's a difference between the 20,000 in cash value and the 5 that he walked away with. But what was the true impact? Well, at year 2, at the end of year 2, start of year 3, he had accumulated about a little over $500,000 in total death benefit. That total death benefit is both the life insurance that he had purchased and the cash value that was accumulated. So in total, at the end of year 2, he had given up about $500,000 in death benefit, meaning if something were to happen to him, his beneficiaries, his family, is missing over $500,000 of death benefit as a result of this, I'll call it stepping over dollars to pick up pennies. Because in essence, that's what happened here. And in addition, you could tell when we were talking, his confidence was shaken. He didn't know who to believe. Like, he had no idea. Like, he had walked through this, had this conversation with his financial advisor, and everything seemed like it made sense. It was like, you know what, I need to take action. I need to get self-directed. I need to be more in control of this process. And based off what I've just learned from my financial advisor, these are the actions that I need to take. So his entire confidence around this process and these steps were shaken. And in addition, if we go back to the original goal was about supplemental income. The original goal was about generating wealth. Well, what impacts your ability to generate wealth or generate a supplemental income? Well, it all depends on your time horizon and the amount of time it takes to be able to generate that income. So in this process, he's lost the compound cycle. Leverage. Last week we talked a lot about how to and where to identify your leverage. So he lost leverage, his ability to leverage this vehicle to do other things. And then, this video starts out talking about $1 million loss. But I'll walk you through how it's actually probably double that, if not $2.5 million. So if he was to put in this $18,000 a year, by age 55, he would have contributed $270,000. By age 59, $342,000. By age 65, about $450,000. Leverage would have been added during that period as well. Well, the leverage dollar amount by age 55 is about $1 million. So the growth on this dollar amount minus the cost of the leverage plus the growth on his dollar amount, these two dollar amounts working together would give him by age 55 about $476,000 in cash value. And that equates to about $47K that he would be able to take in income. And then same at age 59, it would equate to about $75K. And then here about $137K in income is what he would be able to take per year if he were to allow his policy to go out to kind of work its way through to these age points. What if he were to take that same $18,000 and do what his financial advisor is wanting, put it into some account at Vanguard? You're going to get hit by what's called the 4% rule. You can't use qualified dollars before the age of 59 without being taxed and penalized. So you can't even take income at 55. The key piece for me is this conversation should look more like, how do we work together to accomplish the goal? Do you have a fiduciary responsibility to me? Yes or no? If you do, then again, this further implies that this is an and conversation, not an or conversation. Or is your fiduciary responsibility to your broker-dealer first? Meaning your main goal, your main objective is to make sure that you've identified the mutual fund, stocks and bonds, this list of products to sell, because your fiduciary responsibility is to Morgan Stanley, to Vanguard, to Edward Jones, not specifically to me first.
Can you describe what you meant by leverage in the presentation you gave a moment ago?
And again, it's just math. 3% of 540,000 is far more than 7% on 120,000. So the growth of your account starts to exponentially take off because you're adding more and more leverage.